a sharp policy U-turn has taken place as President Donald Trump announced billions worth of new weapons for Ukraine, this including those Patriot missile systems, amid growing frustration with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Speaking alongside NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, Trump said NATO allies would cover the costs of the arms, some of which could reach Ukraine in days. Let's listen in to what President Trump had to say.
Billions of dollars worth of military equipment is going to be purchased from the United States, going to NATO, etc. And that's going to be quickly distributed to the battlefield. I mean, the 500 is, sort of meaningless after a while, because at a certain point it doesn't matter. It's not going to be, 100. 100 is going to serve the same function. But yeah, I have it at 100%. They may have it, I don't know what they're going to end up with. They may have it at 100 too. They may have it at 500.
Well, Trump also issued a 50-day ultimatum to Moscow, agreeing to a peace deal or face 100% tariffs and sweeping secondary sanctions on nations buying Russian exports. Let's once again listen in to the US President.
And one of the reasons that you're here today is to hear that we are very unhappy, I am, with Russia. But we'll discuss that maybe a different day. But we're very, very unhappy with them, and we're going to be doing very severe tariffs if we don't have a deal in 50 days. Tariffs at about 100%. You'd call them secondary tariffs. You know what that means.
Well, lawmakers in the US are pushing for even harsher penalties, including 500% tariffs on countries helping Russia potentially evade restrictions. The move marks a break from Trump's earlier attempts at rapprochement with Moscow, following repeated failed ceasefire talks and continued Russian drone attacks on Ukrainian cities. NATO allies, including Germany, Canada, the United Kingdom and France, have backed Trump's stance, with Germany pledging a decisive role in supporting Ukraine. Let's listen now to Mark Rutte, NATO Secretary General, who was with Trump in the White House.
Because basically what the President is saying, that he is willing, of course, taking consideration what the US needs itself. So it's not that you can have a shopping list and you can order whatever you want, because the US has to make sure that the US keeps its hand on what the US needs, also to keep the whole world safe, because in the end you are the police agent of the whole world. You are the most powerful nation on earth, the most powerful military on earth. But given that, the US has decided to indeed massively supply Ukraine with what is necessary through NATO. Europeans 100% paying for that. And what we have been...
Well, in response, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky welcomed the shift, discussing defence cooperation and arms procurement with Trump's envoy. Let's listen in to what he had to say.
Сьогодні зустріч з генералом Келлогом. Він почав візит в Україну доволі змістовно. Ми говорили продуктивно. Я вдячний президенту Трампу за готовність підтримувати захист життів наших людей. Ця війна, вона триває тільки через Росію, тільки через бажання.
However, EU leaders like Kaja Kallas warn that 50 days is too long given the daily casualties that's being seen. The clock now ticks for Moscow to act before the West imposes its toughest penalties yet. Well, joining us once again to discuss the ramifications of Trump's comments, Jim Rice, of course a professor of international law, joining us from Vigan in the Philippines. Jim, this situation is a difficult one to discuss because ultimately the rhetoric from Donald Trump has changed on this topic multiple times. We've heard, of course, him praise Putin, but then also bash him in the same week. We've heard of the US pulling back support with key defence for Ukraine, but now it is being reinstated. Firstly, just looking at Trump and his comments, can what he says be believed given the flip-flopping that he has done on this specific topic countless times already?
Well, thanks for that good question. Again, flip-flopping is the word with Trump, but it seems to many people, including myself, that where Putin is concerned, Trump really never comes out in a strong way, either by word or by action. And this latest, this latest threat is to essentially delay for 50 days these some kind of threats of increased sanctions, secondary sanctions, which, if true, would be good. However, there is a Senate resolution that's already in the on the floor and could be signed into law very quickly. But Trump seems to be reluctant to do that. So, to me, it's troubling because, on the one hand, Trump is taking for himself powers that don't belong to him under the Constitution, and secondly, his kind of, what's the word, prevarication, his delaying tactics, his reluctance to be a decisive leader when decisive leadership is required is, to me, very alarming, and but it's really just indicative of Trump as being an ineffectual leader.
Yes, Jim, let's now look at what was said and take it at face value, because that's all we can do in this situation until we wait to hear if Trump does make any adjustments to what he's committed. Firstly, looking at this support for Ukraine, billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine, also talking about Patriot missile systems going potentially within days towards Ukraine. Is this, as we're seeing it now, a real show of support for Ukraine and a real backing for Volodymyr Zelensky, who's been asking for this for months? Of course, that blow up in the White House in the Oval Office between Trump and Zelensky is a recent memory, but it seems that the shift has now been made between the US and Ukraine, and that alliance is once again prosperous.
Well, you're right, but really this just shows Trump as being empty in terms of having values of any kind. For him, this is a transactional thing. He's willing to release these defensive weapons to Ukraine on condition that the EU pays for it. So again, it's not impressive. It's not the actions of a great power. It's not the actions of any individual that has integrity or courage. Regrettably, what Trump is doing is he's just revealing to the world that he's got played by Putin, and he's reacting to that because perhaps his ego has been damaged.
Yes, absolutely, Jim. And finally, before we do move on, let's look at these sanctions now. These Russian sanctions that have been threatened. The Senate have been looking at potential 500% secondary sanctions on countries that are buying energy from Russia. Trump saying 100% tariffs, but also setting that deadline. Do you think some politicians in the United States will want that to have gone further, or do you think this is proportionate and fair, given how Trump's rhetoric has been supportive towards Russia?
Well, I fear that Trump will revert to what he's done in the past, which is to essentially delay. He's been threatening to impose sanctions on Putin, on Russia, for 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks after that, and 2 weeks after that. And he seems to continue to do this. And obviously, Putin and the rest of the world has figured out that Trump is just bluffing. And so I don't really see that there's anything there, quite frankly. I'll believe it when I see it.
Jim, thank you very much for providing that insight. This, of course,